Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oaks. Bob Oaks represents an assembly district that includes the counties of Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego. And we want to thank you folks all throughout the area for joining us for our show today. Bob Oaks, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mike.
You look all rested up after a difficult negotiations for this 2017-2018 New York State budget, a budget that is in place. But it was not as easy as it's been the past few years. This was a long negotiation. Budget was about a week or so late, but it's there now. And I guess our responsibility today would be to let the folks watching know, is this going to be a good thing for them, this budget, or not so good?
Well, you mentioned about the whole process. We can rail on that for hours or a few seconds or minutes today, but 13 consecutive days the legislature was in Albany reviewing, getting close to budgets because there are so many things in, and part of that's on I think the shoulders of Governor Cuomo. He put a lot of policy as well as dollars and cents within his budget proposal this year, and so it made it very difficult to come up with final determinations on a number of things. And so the process, everything came through kind of at last minute. Every budget bill, there are a total of 10 budget bills that we considered this year. Every one of them came with a message of necessity, didn't give a 3-day waiting period to review what was in it and whatever. So we threw that off in the corner. It continued to be the 3 or 4 men in a room process, not including the minority. You know, in my mind, Mike, you make better decisions for the state of New York if you have more input as to how this is going to be configured. And so we didn't have that. And so transparency thrown out the door, openness, and what we ended up with, $153+ billion budget. That's a 4+% increase over a year ago. I'm concerned about the spending. The governor likes to say he keeps within a 2% parameter, and the state funds part of the budget did stay within that. However, the governor was forced to use some gimmicks and other things because there was a lot of pressure for spending at the same time. And so the budget, I guess my biggest concern with it would be, I mentioned 2% in the state funds increase, 4% overall, but on the debt side, we increased by over 5%. And so how do you pay for everything in that $153 billion? You do it by borrowing more money than what we ought to be, I think, in this. And so,
is the state maxing out its credit cards? Is it that kind of situation we're talking about?
We have put into law a debt cap, and we push closer to it. And in the out years, next year and the following year, we push closer to them than we would have had we kept it down on the type of borrowing that we're going to do in the state. So all of that together, that's before, those are the numbers we're dealing with. And when you just try to think about the state budget, $153 billion, if you take 20 million, I don't know how your math is, but if you take 20 million and divide it into 153 billion, you get $7,600 for every man, woman, and child in New York State. So that begins to give you an idea how much money is spent on very important things in the state. But also you start to wonder, couldn't we do it cheaper? Why do we spend more than other states do per capita? What are our priorities? How are we impacting the quality of life in New York State?
It seems as if most of this negotiation, or at least the debate when the bills came to the floor of the legislature, weren't even about the numbers. It seems like most of it was about these big programs that the governor wanted to talk about, such as Raise the Age. And I don't know that even a lot of people watching this program really fully understand what Raise the Age means. That and the free college tuition. It's like those were the two big items this year.
They were, and those are things that the governor put on the table. big policy issues. So when you say raise the age, in New York, the age of criminal responsibility. If you get caught shoplifting prior to this change in the law, you get caught shoplifting as a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, it's different, has been different in New York. So a 15-year-old, we've looked at it and said, this is a kid who we're going to put into family court and view that person a bit differently. If you're a 16-year-old, you're going to go to your local justice court and be dealt with like if you were 24 years old or whatever. Well, a lot of people have been pushing and saying, you know, kids aren't developed as well. We ought to give them more breaks. Well, we've had a
They're making mistakes. I heard that one a lot. They're just making mistakes.
And so, but we've had a youthful offender process in New York, which has allowed some, you know, you're a kid, you do that, you get into trouble, you shoplift, but you don't get into trouble again. We're going to seal that, and that's not going to affect you getting a job down the road and whatever. We've had that type of structure in New York State in a way for the district attorney and the defense attorneys and whatever to figure out how to manage this. Well, now we are saying if you're 16 or 17, until you reach your 18th birthday, if you have any of a host of different type of offenses, you're going to go shift that to family court. And so in my case, that's going to be going to Auburn or to Oswego or to Lyons for that to be held in the court instead of being handled out in the area wherever you committed that offense. That in and of itself, cost-wise and whatever, is going to expand the overall cost of doing business to the court system and ultimately to the taxpayers in New York, let alone all the other implications of that. And so we could go on for a couple shows on that. College affordability.
It's free now.
Well,
College is for free tuition. Are we not going to pay the professors? How does that work?
The governor's throw of the term out there, free tuition or free college, sounds one way to people. The reality of it, though, is quite different. One, we already had a TAP structure in New York, which says if you make limited amount of dollars, you're going to get your tuition paid for. If you make some additional dollars, your family, we're going to give you some assistance toward that, and it's on a sliding scale and whatever. Those of us who want to try to make college more affordable said, why don't we take an investment, if we're going to put more money into higher ed, and just make that chart work better, give some additional dollars. The governor didn't want to hear that. And so I think, as in a lot of things, the governor wants a few checkoffs to say, I accomplished this in New York. So if, in case he wants to consider doing other things down the road, he can end up telling everybody, we don't have to talk about it, just look at the list, I did all these things. The implications and ramifications for the taxpayers of New York and the people of New York, I think, are significant.
So you had all these high-profile policy issues that the governor wanted on the table. You also had the numbers that you expressed concern about. I'm sure a lot of you folks realize this already, but I think I've neglected to mention that Bob Oaks is the ranking Republican on the Assembly's Ways and Means Committee, which put him right front and center in terms of having to try to make sense out of all this that was going on in these budget talks and the bills that came to the floor of the Assembly. You stood up and talked about some of these things on a number of occasions. Let's show one of such clip of you in action on that, and we'll be back to talk more about how this budget plays out for you folks on today's Assembly calendar.
My concerns continue to be, we did not do the increase in the millionaire's tax, which I was pleased that that didn't happen, but we still continue to